Then I will share my screen. So, slideshow. So, is everyone seeing my slides?
Yes.
All right, very good. So, we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays. This is our season 8. If you want to learn more about Environmental Fridays, you could use the link here, the URL, as well as use the QR code at the bottom right. So today, this is our lineup for this season 8. We've had quite a few already. This is the 14th episode. And we have still a few more to come. You'll hear about that later. This Environmental Fridays program is brought to you in partnership with
Make sure a chapter like this never happens again.
Yeah, this is brought to you in partnership with the American Chemical Society, which is one of the largest single discipline scientific organization in the world. I have a long-standing relationship with Benton Spirit and its publisher, Princella Tobias, and also GC Scored, Every Piece Matters. And of course, I have a very long relationship with my sister, who is the president and founder of GC Scored, a social emotional wellness organization. So these are our partners. You can go to Google and type in Environmental Fridays Facebook group, and that way you could get into our group and you could, join and post environmental related stuff. We are open and welcome into that. Also, all of our videos from all 8 seasons are posted on YouTube. This QR code here is for season 8, but you can again go to Google, type in Environmental Fridays YouTube playlist, and you will find um, our playlist with videos from season 1. Just another thing to emphasize, time to emphasize what's happening in April in terms of in the environment. This is the month where we celebrate Earth Day, April 22nd. There are also some other observances that occur across the month during this entire month. Earth Month, National Garden Month, Poetic Earth Month, and so on. All of these, again, can be, if you want more details, can be accessed on Google. So today I have the pleasure of having as my co-host a friend, 5+ years, I think. Um, she's presented here before on Environmental Fridays. Her name is Dr. Motria Cordell. She is an environmental health scientist working in our region, the Great Lakes region, for over 25 years. Lots of experience. She has an MS and a PhD in environmental occupational health sciences from University of Illinois at Chicago School of Public Health. For her master's research during the 1990s, she traveled to Ukraine, measured soil and air contaminants in the Mariupol city, and noted here that this town has been largely destroyed due to the Russian invasion and is currently under occupation. Um, so her work includes health risk assessment in contaminated communities, responding to chemical spills and disasters. And she is currently an adjunct professor actually at two universities, University of Illinois at Chicago, as well as Andrews University. Before she introduces our speaker, I have a little surprise here. I think is in order, um, because here we want to show our solidarity with Ukraine. And let me just get this going.
Desmond, I don't think we see the video.
Yeah, Desmond, the video's not playing. Do you need to change the settings?
I didn't hear. I didn't hear. What did you say?
The video's not playing. Do you need to change the settings and try?
You're not seeing the video's not playing at all?
No sound
Yeah.
No sound? Okay, I'm sorry. I'll have to try and do that again. But this is what I was trying to play is the national anthem of Ukraine during this wartime. I'll try to fix that here later on. Okay, so Motria, if you could go ahead and introduce our speaker for today.
Yeah, I'll continue. So thank you, Desmond. As you mentioned, we have worked together also with Dr. Laurel Berman. We both teach environmental health, and we've been working with the community in Benton Harbor for quite a few years. You had a lead and drinking water crisis, and my specialty is air pollution. So I've been working on promoting knowledge about air pollution's effects on people's health. I've been on this webinar before talking about the air quality index and wildfire smoke, and also climate change and how climate change relates to human health. We did 3 years ago now, at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we did host a couple of speakers from Ukraine. They actually were in Ukraine at the time. One was from a nature park, and they talked about how the landscape and the animals under bombardment were suffering, and how the workers at the parks needed our support. So that was interesting. That was quite a while ago. So hopefully today, Daria will offer some updated context on what's going on with the war, as well as her topic. And so I'll read her bio here. Daria Cymbaluk is the author of an upcoming book. It's not out yet, Ecocide in Ukraine, The Environmental Cost of Russia's War. She's an interdisciplinary researcher, and her practice includes writing and image making. She serves as an assistant professor at the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures and the Committee on Environment, Geography, and Urbanization at the University of Chicago. If you look on the announcement and follow the link, you can see more about her work. We've known each other for a few years online. I'm an environmental scientist, but have really been following a lot of academics in the environmental humanities, and that's the area where Daria comes from. And we did finally get to meet in person when I was taking my kid on a college tour. We went down to University of Illinois, which is funny because we both live in Chicago. Daria is here in Chicago with us, but she had traveled down to University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana to present on her book, and we were there on a college tour. So that all worked out very nicely. And I'm excited to hear more about her book, and I encourage everyone to ask your questions. And by the way, I'm wearing my Ukrainian embroidered Vyshyvanka in Daria's honor. So please take it away, and we look forward to your presentation today, Daria.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me know, shall I take
Go ahead. Yes. You
next?
can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I mean, I just wanted really to thank Desmond, you and Motra and everybody involved in this, organizing this. I'm very new. I'm not extremely new to Midwest because I did my undergrad studies in Ohio, but I'm new to Chicago. I just moved here in September and learning. Tomorrow I'm going to be the first time ever going to Michigan. So I am learning about local places, finding a lot of similarities between the places here and places back home. Yeah, and I'm just really excited to be meeting everybody, and honored to have this opportunity. Thank you so much for building as well as and opening with the statement of solidarity. It really means a lot to us today. And it's a kind of mixed genre talk. I really encourage everybody to interrupt and ask questions as I go. As Motra said, my training is predominantly in the humanities. I also draw, I make videos, and I will share a bit of that today. And as we were talking with Motra in preparation for this talk today, we've decided, because a lot of the audience as well perhaps would also be watching in the recording, as I know Desmond, also young people. I was kind of thinking as well of tracing my own path, like how I arrived to this moment in time now, and kind of how my practice developed. And I really didn't plan to be an academic, but kind of thinking with the arts and how that guided my work. Because maybe and community engagement work, because maybe it would be also helpful and relevant for people, and I would love to hear back from you as well. But I'm also happy to talk about any environmental impacts now. So yeah, steer me if some things will be more interesting than others. So the book actually, so it came out. I have it. Well, it's blurred. My screen is blurred, but it came out in the UK. It came out in the UK, so I have. Sorry, I'm messing up with the camera. I do have a copy here. Actually, I have two copies, but it's going to come out in the US on the 2nd of June. Always later. I wonder if it's the question of letter U in the spelling of the words, but it is out in the UK and in Europe. And I love the motto of Environmental Friday, that it is personal, and that's very much how this book is for me. It's based on a lot of data analysis. Well, it has it has data analysis, it has media analysis, but at the same time, it's really is a gesture of writing in particular about the region I come from in Ukraine, in the south of Ukraine, and thinking of the space. I mean, obviously writing from about Ukraine as a place which is a home to me, not just a case study or research object, and it really guides my writing in this. So, and I really wanted to tell the story that is engaging. So I was thinking about that motto that you had. But today, so I'm going to share my presentation. Yeah, so this is a small promotional video that Polity did about the book. But I wanted, maybe sorry, I'm just organizing all my buttons. I planned this also as a talk for the audiences who might not know much about Ukraine, or even though you've heard previously, might be helpful to refresh. And I wanted to ask, maybe to start off, maybe not to ask, but I wanted to ask if people know where in Ukraine the war started and when, or if you know anything at all, perhaps. And if you, does anybody know? non-Ukrainian.
Right. I think the Ukrainians would know, but you could let us know, the rest of us.
Anybody could volunteer their knowledge. Or what do you know of the beginning of the war?
I mean, I don't remember like exactly where. I just know that basically Russia encroached on Ukraine's territory. In terms of the geographic location, I don't know.
No, this is great. I mean, just trying to figure out, right, how much people know. So I think it's mostly talked to in the press, in the Western press. It's when we talk about the full-scale invasion, the start usually is framed as 2022, which is not really the date that a lot of Ukrainians, including me, would count. How do I get out of this story? Sorry, how do I get out of this slide? No.
It really started in Crimea.
Crimea,
It goes
right.
back to
Yes.
Crimea, but it was
Thank you.
February 2022, wasn't it? And the Russians went into mainly the Russian-speaking territories.
Oh no, they were in the Russian-speaking territories and arming, rebels and stuff like that.
But it was all the ones to the east. It was they generally attacked from the east, and it was
The
the
east, exactly.
Russian-speaking territories to the east, and it was on a very broad front, wasn't it?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, no, you both are correct. So for us in Ukraine, the start of the war is 2014. So it is much longer. I mean, in fact, it's 11th year of the war. So 2022 is really just an escalation in which it starts to affect the rest of the country. But it did start with the annexation of Crimea and with the start of the war in the east of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, which are commonly referred to as Donbass. The Donetsk coal basin as a big. It used to be the biggest mining region, and this is also where Motra's research mentioned on Mariupol, and the Mariupol, one of the most destroyed cities in Ukraine, and one of the. I mean, I don't like, maybe most is not the correct way to put it, but many cities have been really destroyed in the east, but. It used to be the most densely populated area, extremely industrialized area in Ukraine. Here on the map, this is an old map, but you can see this is the east regions. This is way before 2022, the Donbass region. Extremely urban, extremely densely populated, lots of industries, steel, coal, metal, chemical industries, everything you can imagine. Of course that affects the way the war is handled. It affects how many people are impacted, and particularly since a lot of the storage territories have been destroyed and they have been under the Russian occupation, they've been severely mismanaged in coal mining regions. As most of you would probably know, you really have to manage the water, and Motra perhaps can comment on it more, but the majority of the mines are under Russian control since for a long time, and they stopped pumping water out of the mines, and there's really significant concern for the contamination of the groundwater, and the whole kind of environmental state of those territories. So
I have a question. So in 2014, what was the rationale back then? Because we have rationales for the escalation, but that we are, I think, kind of familiar with. But what was the rationalization back in 2014, number one? And number two, was the current president, Zelensky, also president then?
No, Zelensky was not a president. So it's kind of allows me to link back to my American experience. I graduated from college in Ohio, Kenyon College, in 2013, and I moved back to Ukraine, and in a couple of months the revolution starts. And I was in Kyiv then. I was a very active participant of the Ukrainian revolution. And the revolution starts because we had a corrupt president, a really basically a thug, and On top of everything, there was people didn't really feel safe in the country. I mean, they didn't have, they didn't feel like they could get education, which is good and which is could be accessible to people. They didn't feel like they could have good medical services. They didn't feel like the police was there on their side. There are many different, there's a big narrative and then there's smaller. For me, it was important to observe, I come from the south of Ukraine, not far from the Black Sea, from quite a peripheral area, like far from the capital in Ukraine. Many people in Ukraine haven't been to the city. I've been to, not even speaking about people from abroad anywhere. But for example, in my home region, and not in the main city in the region, but in one of the smaller towns, there was an incident several months before the revolution when a woman was raped by 2 policemen. And the people in my city, which is not by any means like a very revolutionary city, like went to the streets protesting because they felt like, I mean, if police doesn't protect you, like what kind of state we live in? So I feel like there were a lot of grievances within Ukraine with the government and with the state of these things. And then Ukrainians were really wanted, there was a decision that whether Ukraine goes in the direction of closer cooperation with Europe or with Russia, and Ukrainians predominantly across the country supported the European direction. And the president was supposed to sign a European deal. And the last minute he changed his mind and he didn't. And basically he turned away on the people and towards Russia. And that's when the students in the capital started to protest against it. But it wasn't only the question of Europe, it was the question of a general situation in a country that people were just fed up with the state of things. And so the students started protested, and on the 30th of November 2013, the government basically violently dispersed them, like beat up the students from the main square. And they thought this is it, this is kind of the way things had been handled in Belarus and Russia. And so they thought, okay, we're going to crack down on the protesters, and basically the regime going to get more authoritarian and roll on with its measures. And they didn't really expect the response, because the next day, 1 million people came out in Kiev in support of the protesters and against the violence that the government can just beat up students who were absolutely innocent, defenseless, and were just expressing, the democratic right of disagreement with the course that the government took. And basically that grew then in a massive movement on the national scale. People were really mobilized. And it led, and the government kept repressing in response, but people were protesting. And in the end, that resulted in the ousting of the president. So Viktor Yanukovych, the president, then ran away to Rostov, actually. Well, he ran away to Russia. So he was ousted of the office through this process of revolution, and Ukraine finds itself in quite an unstable situation when we didn't have a government, really, we didn't have a president. And in this moment of instability, and you have to also understand that the democratic protests in Ukraine, with all its political difficulties, we had, we had more presidents in the course of Putin being in power. We had 5 presidents or something at this moment. Ukraine never had a really authoritarian state, unlike many other neighbors around. And so it presents also kind of its dangerous model and a dangerous tension for Russia. And in that moment of instability, when we didn't have a government, Russia utilizes it to basically attack and annex Crimea illegally. I mean, it was really rapid. Ukraine didn't have, if you don't have a government, you can't respond as well. It was a very particular situation. And then the east of Ukraine is also attacked, and by that moment, Ukraine starts to respond, and basically the war starts. There are many narratives.
So why did he go after Crimea?
Russia had a military base in Crimea since the fall of the Soviet Union. It already had, and that that wasn't easy in many ways. I mean, and there are all this
the Navy port and everything.
The Navy, and the military presence, and then Crimea also has been really colonized by Russia for a long time. It has a very ancient history. So
it was easy for them to get in.
Yeah, so Crimea, actually, there are two, oh my God, there are more, but there's several indigenous people that are recognized in Ukraine, and all of them are native to Crimea, and the biggest indigenous group is the Crimean Tatars, for example, and that's the only place they live in the world. Like, that's their only native land.
Wow.
And they used, alongside many other peoples, there were Greeks, I mean, there were Karaims, there were like lots of like different groups that lived in Crimea. But Crimea, of course, first gets colonized by Russia with its kind of expansion towards and colonization also of the south and east of Ukraine in the 17th century. And from then onwards, you get an active resettlement of Crimean territories with the Russian imperial population then. And then it was also actively, I mean, it's a strategic location in the Black Sea, and it was actively fortified in the Soviet Union as a military base. The population is, there's a lot of military personnel in Crimea, and also like the old Soviet military personnel. So when Russia brands Crimea as Russian these days, I mean, this is also a result of the, centuries of colonization. And at the expense, basically, of the cleansing that happened and continues to happen, because Crimean Tatars continue to be the people who remained in Crimea. Lots of Crimean Tatars got displaced to the either abroad or to non-occupied territories of Ukraine, but a lot of them remained because of many reasons, and they're particularly targeted within Russia. But this is right. So this is for Ukraine. 2014 is the beginning of the war, and I'm in Kyiv then. My father is a military officer. I was involved very actively in the revolution. I was then dating somebody who enlisted. I mean, I'm very much part of this context. At the same time, lots of people get displaced. As I said, the east of Ukraine and Crimea, I mean, but the east in particular is extremely urbanized and populated. There's so many people. Donetsk is one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, and people, of course, get displaced in a climate which is also politically difficult for many reasons. I mean, there's instability, but on top of everything, Yanukovych, the president who was ousted, comes from the region of the east as well, and his regime was a kind of mafia that people associated with the region, and that results in a very ugly demonization of anybody coming from the east, right? So within Ukraine, actually, there is not really a great reception of people internally displaced. It's a very politicized, tense conversation. And I'm in Ukraine then, and I meet a couple of families. I've never been to the east, actually. I'm from the south. It's not uncommon not to travel a lot across Ukraine, I guess, or it wasn't uncommon that I haven't been there, but I befriended a number of families, and I'm not an academic. I was teaching English in Kyiv at the time and doing art projects, and this is 2015, and I end up with a number of amazing colleagues, so Yulia Filipova and Viktor Korvik-Zasypkin. We end up founding, through a summer school, really, in which we took part, an art project called Donbass Odyssey. So Donbass is the name of the region. And the idea was that we really wanted to interview, and this is us on the exhibition in Kyiv. We wanted to interview people who were coming from the region, because there were so many stereotypes about this region. Especially, I mean, like any Manian region, I think in any country in the world always gets negative stereotypes for various reasons. But there were so many stereotypes, and it was difficult to decipher what is the human narrative in this. And we wanted to talk to people who actually come from there, and we asked them, and at the same time, we didn't want to put them in a place when they have to address the space of trauma. They could if they wanted to, but not to push them there, right? So we decided to ask them about their hometowns, and we asked them to draw maps of the towns they were coming from. So we interviewed around 60 people across the country. We started in Kyiv, but then we worked in different cities, and they drew these amazing maps of their hometowns, which we had a ridiculous small budget, but it allowed us to print. And the idea is that we would place these maps of these hometowns and stories around the cities. So we would walk around, and luckily Ukraine, that's why I love Chicago as well, but Ukraine similarly has a lot of just metal surfaces around, you can use it as your art space in a way. And so we would glue these maps, but we also had magnets that would go on top directly. And the idea was that people take this magnet from the town that they don't have access to because it's in the war zone, but kind of imaginary travel to the spaces. And we wanted to build this dialogue between communities in the capital, in other cities, and communities who were coming in, didn't know much about these new places. And we did exhibitions as well. We did all kind of formats through this. It was a project that lasted for several years. We drew with the people in the streets of Odessa in the south. But the reason I wanted to open with this, because it shaped me significantly as a researcher in terms of community engagement, in terms of, thinking of the interviews that you do that don't go just in your drawer and in your research article, that go back to public space, kind of create a space for dialogue, create a kind of intervention in the public space. And it really kind of impacted my also perception of knowledge. And I think the relation between knowledge and war, right? I started working with this context when the war was already ongoing. And what the knowledge do, I think it's a very different environment that you work in safe environment, because you want the change now. Everything is urgent, right? In fact, everything is already too late. You want to make a change like yesterday. So it's kind of prompts you to structure your work differently. But I wanted to show some of these maps for many reasons. But I mean, first of all, they're very beautiful. But one of the things, like, I knew very little about the region, except that it's like industrial region, mining region. And for me, it was amazing that people talked a lot about different trees, different nature areas. And in fact, I ended up then going for master's and continuing this research, and kind of got recruited for a PhD program. I never thought of myself I would ever do a PhD. But I remember when I started doing the PhD program, I thought I'm going to work on displacement. And when I was looking at these maps and the stories, and I had more than 60 of them, I kind of like realized how many stories about plants, about trees, about gardens people talked about. And it's not something that I pushed them for. In fact, I never had a garden. I still don't have a garden. I never had the privilege of even having many houseplants, because I moved so much as a student. And, having houseplants means having stable housing, which I didn't for various reasons. And so it wasn't like on my radar to think about it, but people talked about it, like the gardens they left behind, the trees that their grandfather planted, the different plant species. I mean, Ukraine is quite a big country with different ecosystems, the different plants that they couldn't find in the new areas and they were missing. All of this kind of featured in the interviews, and just by looking at the stories, I kind of they led me to this question of the environment in relation, and the role the environment played in relation to the war and displacement. But for me, it was important that I arrived through the stories, right? It wasn't just like, I'm going to study this. And one of these examples of the maps, for example, here in the lower bottom, so this is Luhansk, one of the capital cities of the region of Luhansk region. Also, industrial city, also has a long history, but was founded as an industrial city. But at the bottom of it, the narrator and the artist, or the author of this map, she drew steppe, which I don't know how many people heard about the steppe. Ukraine.
No.
We have prairies. Are they similar to prairies?
They're similar. That's what that's exactly my so steppe is very similar to prairies. Okay. These are grasslands, and this is where they come in the Europe and Asia. So they start all across. So this is Pontic-Caspian steppe, but actually they stretch further. So they're different. There's the so-called Great Eurasian steppe that stretches all across from Hungary to China. And then within that, there are different types of grassland, like kind of ecosystems within them, right? Because some of the soils are more sandy, some are less. And so Ukraine is part of the Pontic-Caspian steppe. And you can see Ukraine like here in the middle. And the steppes cover predominantly south and east of Ukraine, which is also where I come from. I come from the south, but it's also, of course, the areas where the war fighting happens predominantly. So this is the ecosystems that get impacted. And it's so interesting that in her map of the city, and this is, they look very similar to prairies, different plant species. And in fact, there was a lot of imperial exchange between United States and then Russian Empire in terms of how to plow, how to settle the grasslands here in US, but also in Canada. And that happened, for example, through Mennonite communities that were moved, that migrated to US and brought some of this knowledge, brought some of this plant varieties that were then basically used here for monocrop agriculture. But the techniques of kind of settlement, displacement of indigenous population, the use of land, are very much in conversation with each other, even though geographically we think of like prairies here and the Eurasian steppe is very far away.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that Ukraine is one of the world's largest producers of wheat.
Yes.
And
Great
so
question.
just to kind of locate it in this prairie region, what region then is the wheat mostly grown in?
It's the steppe region. That's part of it. Like this is the steppe region, and in fact, environmentalists in Ukraine critique the impact of the wheat production on Ukrainian soil, because the steppe. I mean, as you know from the prairie, there's a Polish botanist who gave Paczowski, his name, Józef Paczowski, but he worked a lot in the south of Ukraine, and he gave this amazing metaphor of the steppe being a forest upside down, right? And we know it from the prairies as well, that the roots are really deep, and a lot of life actually happens underground, not on the surface, and that's what makes the soil so rich. Right? It's years and years of that active life of the soil that produces what you might know as black soil or chernozem, right? This is especially fertile soil that very much sought after by different imperial projects, including the Nazi Germany. When Ukraine is under Nazi occupation, like there's literally accounts of like the soil being extracted and moved away because it's so fertile, but it's the work of like centuries of nature that allows the soil to be that way.
4 seasons in that region. What is it like in terms of the climate?
It's really, when I moved to the Midwest, it's really similar. It's like very dry, hot summer. Winters are cold, a bit milder. Depends where you are in Ukraine. So if for us, it's like similarly, I think, to here. The more you move inside the continent, the more is distinction. So when you get all the way to Kazakhstan and Central Asia, like the winters are really cold, the summers are very hot. In the east of Ukraine, similarly, the winters would be like colder in the very east, probably a bit less colder when in the regions where closer to the Black Sea. But yes, we would have, so now of course it's climate change, but you would get a bit of snow in winter, but you would get, below 0 temperatures, and summers are very dry and hot. In fact, the steppes are like the prairies, also in the dry kind of area. Well, for us it's dry, arid, climate risk precarious. They're the most affected ecosystems in Ukraine in terms of climate change. But they were populated, this area, similarly to US, the way they were before pre-colonial times. They are inhabited by semi-nomadic, nomadic population, right? And they're maintained through the move of cattle, through the move of different like wild donkeys and all kind of animals. And the animals are in fact very important because they they eat the grasses, but they also like step on the soil. So it's all a kind of connected ecosystem that exists. And obviously with the colonization and agricultural settlement, that severely impacts the way that land is managed, not unlike here. It's kind of practices are very similar. And the displacement of indigenous population to different parts of the Russian Empire. But the monocrop, I mean, when the agriculture gets really industrial in the Soviet Union, and when the breadbasket myth is older, but one of its iterations is also very prominent in the Soviet Union, like Ukraine is this world's granary. That has a very detrimental impact on the soil, in fact, because it exhausts the soil, right? And it also, and on top of everything, it basically destroys all these native grasslands, like they're gone. And in fact, the last statistics I have, which is way before 2014, so it's like way before the start of the war. And as I said, the war really impacts particularly these grassland ecosystems, is that Ukraine had less than 3% of the actually unplowed steppe parts. And it's getting less and less because, as I said, it's the war impacts them, and on top of everything is this pressure on Ukraine to produce more grain, results in the territories that were not plowed before being under risk of being plowed and disappearing. So the steppe is really kind of vanishing. And in fact, I mean, I grew up in the south in the so-called steppe region, but I was surrounded just like here. I mean, if you drive around Illinois, you mostly see like cornfields, right? I mean, similarly, you will see sunflowers. So while Ukraine takes a lot of national pride, which is also a kind of colonial image in itself in this grain basket, though it's complicated because I'm also like critical of the critique of environmentalists, because I know that Ukraine is, it's kind of like, I think of it as a really a kind of complex system of dependencies in which Ukraine, of course, also then providing to a lot of countries that are, dependent, I mean, such as Egypt, on the grain, which is it's a good thing. Like people need to be fed, but I feel like it's the whole system is unhealthy in terms of we need to like develop sustainable agriculture in all of these places. But it's a question beyond probably this talk. But yeah, so the grain production is part of this actually in a very close relationship to the steppe.
Okay.
Right. And so it is actually, in fact, when I was interviewing the people coming from the East, that I was like, oh, I also come from the same kind of environmentally similar place. And I got interested. And my PhD was mostly about displacement and stories about plants. But then as part of that, in 2019, so it's before the full-scale invasion, I went to the East to this nature reserve, and all of them there are steppe nature reserves. And I visited, it's Kredova flora, chalk flora, which is a steppe ecosystem, but also has this chalk hills that also then create a particular kind of environment for certain plants to grow. And I interviewed its director, and I walked around. And this nature reserve, so Serhiy Lemansky, whose photos are there, is the director and really is the kind of the soul of this place. And this reserve was in the midst of fighting in 2014-15, and so when I was there in 2019, I was looking at the impact of the war on the destruction of this nature reserve, and you can see, right, like you can see the digging out of the trenches. There were craters from shelling, there were shells found, and when you think about I mean, there are many environmental impacts of the war, and many, and then depending, when and what happens, it also impacts it differently. So I often think of, like air and soil and water are different systems that could be impacted, and soil has a different temporality from air and water. So, for example, when the Kakhovka Dam was breached in 2023. It was a huge, devastating loss and impact of the release of the fresh water into the Black Sea, for example. And, the animals and plants that live in salinated water can't live in fresh water, clearly. So there was a big, massive, drastic change. But then because water moves and flows faster, than soil, the Black Sea then by now is able to kind of restore a lot of its previous functions, right? Unlike soil, which contains matter differently or contains contaminated matter, and Modra can talk about it better as a scientist, but things staying in soil differently, and including heavy metals and chemicals that release with missiles. So soil, I think, has a particular life of itself that we would have to address. But also, of course, the trenches cause erosion. They serve as traps for a lot of animals. There are a lot of videos of animals being trapped in the trenches. And in fact, some of these animals people encountered for the first time, some of the endemic species that they never knew existed. But the erosion, then one of the dangers is that it exposes the soil to introduce plants that might push out the endemic, more endangered plants out. So there are lots of layers to it. And there's a term for this. I don't remember the scholars who coined it. I can look it up. But the term is bomb turbation for this kind of change that happens to the soil during the war. Anyway, I went there in 2019 to look at this impact. as part of my PhD research then. And then in 2022, I learned, and Serhiy Lemansky remained there all this time. And I have to stress that the work of environmentalists in Ukraine always have been very dangerous because of poaching. Like it's not a profession that is mega safe in many ways. But on top of everything, its environment has been severely underfunded in Ukraine. Way before the war, and a lot of the budget that was allocated for the environment went to the maintenance of the Chernobyl zone of exclusion. So, it was really a profession of commitment, and still remains obviously a profession of commitment, but it's just the deprivation in which environmentalists live, the state of nature reserves is really devastating when you get there, materially speaking. And people who are taking care, they're really just it's out of great love for these places. So Serhiy Lemansky is one of those people who this place is like his life. I don't know how to put it, but his house was destroyed in 2022, and by now even more so. He's really near the cities that constantly under shelling, and this is like a better, like now just like gone fully. Luckily, he was able to be the environmentalists organized and managed to get him evacuated in 2022. And so I learned, I was there in 2019 and I learned about this. And I was like, what can I do? How can I raise some money? What can I do about this place? And that's one of the other ways, like in addition to my research, my artistic practices kicks in. So then I developed this workshop/art project. I didn't to see the step again. And the idea was that I raise some funding for him, but I also tell people about these places which been, in the state of war for many, many years. And I feel like in the news, you only get, rightly so, images of destruction and suffering, but it's hard to imagine those places as inhabited by people or other species. You only see this like fire and burning. And I wanted to tell about these places, how do they look like? How do they smell? Like who lives there? And the one thing I think is important to remember is that people still remain in all those destroyed cities. Like in all the cities you see on TV, that people live without access to water, anything, for many reasons, but people remain in all the destruction. And so I did this project in which he's an amazing photographer as well, Serhiy. Kind of a self-taught photographer, and so I went through his photos. I was invited then in London to do in a festival to do something in one of the nature reserves there, and so I took his photos of plants it was June, so in that moment when those plants would blossom in Ukraine. So I went through all his photo archive on Facebook. And what I did was collaging them and drawing them further. And basically, so you can see some of these plants from this nature reserve. I did this reference book, which is now an exhibition in Sweden, actually. But I made this like very quickly. I was finish it on a train as usual, like this urgency, like no sleep, the war is ongoing. But I made this reference book not as an art object, but I wanted to engage people there at the festival to like tell them about the plant species that grow there, tell them about this place, tell them about Serhiy, the person who takes care of this place, and ask them to draw me an image of this plant on a piece of paper. So they would also be learning about the species. And I did it in a number of different places in the world after that, but you can see how beautiful the things that people made.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this is just people I met. It was just incredible. And it really led me also to having this great conversations. I would be happy, like, I'll come to Michigan and draw with all of you. Yes, I'm happy. I really love doing this. But people would like that. Yeah, let's organize them. I would be happy to. And I'm also like learning now about, sorry, I get a lot of feedback. Yeah, I'm learning now about lots of plant species here, which is different and I'm not in the office now, but for example, the Artemisia, what is Artemisia? Wormwood, right? That grows here. Like when I arrived to Chicago and I was walking on the south side and I saw, and you see it here also in this photo, but this is a Scottish version. But I saw this wormwood plant And the smell of it is really like the smell of the Ukrainian south. And I was like, oh my God, it grows here. So I have it in my office. But this is like, it just is like the smell, like you smell it and you're home,
Yes.
And this, for example, and during this conversation, so this, for example, was in Scotland, people would talk to me about different plant species and they would bring me local varieties. So here you see the local oregano and this wormwood from Scotland, which are of course very different because Scotland is like completely different ecosystem, but still they're like sister plants of of the place where I did the workshop, which was so touching. Like this kind of
we have a couple questions, so if I'll maybe take another 5 minutes to finish what you've brought today. Thank you.
Okay. No, stop me. I can talk for forever. Anyway, so this is one of the ways, and well, maybe very quick. Okay, I'll just finish very quickly. But this story about plants kind of continued, and in the book, I also have a whole chapter on plants. And one of the things I look for, and just maybe quickly to share, is the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group. And you had Oleksiy Vasylyuk speaking to you, the co-founder of it, like really the person who does incredible work in Ukraine. And I always encourage people, if they can spread awareness about them, donate to them. They really doing incredible work on the ground in Ukraine in terms of wildlife. So I always want to highlight that. But one of the things that the Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group did in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when the war escalated, is make the list of 20 plants on the brink of extinction. And you probably could guess that majority of these plants are steppe plants, for reasons that they are directly in the conflict area, but also because because of this grain production as well. So it's like, the war is the kind of last drop in their story of extinction in many ways. And so in the book, I look at the whole list and try to think of the species, but also maybe just quickly share. This is the plant species, is a cornflower, a type of cornflower that grows only in 2 places in the world, both of them near my hometown. And I saw images of it circulated by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine in 2022, when basically the place it was growing was burned, and it was featured. And I had a privilege in 2023 to go to this field where you cannot walk anymore through it because it's unclear whether there is an exploded ordnance. And my hometown was not occupied, but there was intense fighting. I mean, it continues to be shelled sometimes. There was an attack a couple of days ago, but not as regularly as in 2022, thanks God. But 2022 was very intense, and there was danger of it being occupied and under siege, which didn't happen because of their incredible resistance. But and the cost of many lives. But in 2023, we went to this field and we were not told not to walk on this protected area of land, which in fact probably could also be better, this non-intervention of humans for the plants there. But it was such an immense, you cannot imagine like what I felt when we managed to spot. We were looking for it for a while, and we couldn't go inside the field, but we were on the edge. And we thought we wouldn't find it. And then we saw this plant that's really about, like very endangered. And there's something so special with prairie and steppe plants, even though they can grow really tall, but sometimes not, that you have to like bow down to like really meet them, like you have to kind of get down to the earth. And this is, I've been painting it and like learning about this plant. And there's so little. I was like quite inspired when I read, like Braiding Sweetgrass, or like I feel like there's beautiful indigenous storytelling here. But in Ukraine, unfortunately, when you look up some of these plants, like you don't get anything except dry botanical data, which is really uninteresting. It's like this plant is 20 centimeters long and I don't know, blossoms in June. Like there's little you can get out of that. There are hardly many drawings or photographs. It's like not very documented. So part of my work as well with this book, but also like through images, is trying to kind of like, how can I pull these plants out of this oblivion in a way? Like, because when you look at this list of the 20 plant species on the brink of extinction, the other level of sadness that on top of that they are obviously disappearing is that we know so little, so even epistemically, we know so little about these plants. And so I've been trying to like make images and stories to kind of make space for them. So this is an iconic for us plant of the steppe. It's a stipa grass or feather grass, often compared to like sea as it moves. And this is particularly from the Azov Sea. And And if I have, do I have 5 minutes? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll stop because maybe I'll stop and open for the questions. Otherwise, I can show also a video essay, but maybe it's better questions.
All right. Motria, there's one question from Lloyd. What do you think the impact of the US deal concerning mineral reserves in Ukraine will have on the environment? So as a backdrop to that, can you give us some information about like mining in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, majority, I mean, there's still, like, as I said, this is the east of Ukraine. There are some mines in the west of Ukraine. Majority of the mines have been either under occupation or on the front line. So it's not really possible to conduct a mining activity, though there are also mines that operate till today in very dangerous conditions, including in the east of Ukraine. I mean, the mining was in decline in Ukraine already in the 80s, even not, if not earlier, but especially 80s and then 90s, it really hit really hard. It was very economically difficult regions because of that. I mean, global recession in terms of coal, and you have to go deeper. It becomes unprofitable to extract it. So, and a lot of the mines that its equipment was getting old already in the 90s. But a lot of the mines, as I said, were flooded. And the thing is with the occupation, like anything occupied by Russia, we don't know the state of it. We have no access. Nobody, in fact, has access in the world. No international organization has access. Those territories are usually severely mismanaged. And obviously, like if the groundwater is poisoned, it's not going to stay within the national borders, right? Like the thing is with the environment, it never stays within.
So the deal that was trying to be made between Ukraine and the US, that was going to revive the mining industry. And what mineral reserves were they trying to get? And what do you think?
No, the deal would be interested in like rare earth minerals, so not
Rare earths. Okay.
right.
Okay.
I mean, and things like lithium, which are not Ukraine hasn't developed. I mean, we know that, but there's also little known. Like we know that there are deposits, but there hasn't been extraction, in fact, in Ukraine of this.
But they're also looking for lithium and copper.
Yeah, lithium. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
and there hasn't been. I mean, there is like, there've been attempts to do the research on and start, but it hasn't been production of lithium in Ukraine. It hasn't happened. I mean,
in general, rare earth mining is really harsh on the environment because most of the time it's not very concentrated, it's spread out, and you have to, do that in a wide area. It's really intensive and impacts the environment a lot. Going after rare earths.
I mean, yeah. If anybody has ever been to a mining area, I mean, the conditions of life there. That's all I can say. I mean, and like the way the management, yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a comment that, we sit here and we're going through a tremendous turmoil in the US. And at the same time, through work, I'm in an active project in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. It's a NATO partner countries kind of a collaborative that we formed looking at military brownfields. So mine-scarred land, former military, tanks, arsenal, unexploded ordnance. And this is historically to the present. So in real time, brownfields are being created, as you kind of implied, and life keeps going on. We put out a book. I just this morning, I'm off work today, but I'm correcting the last bits of a commentary about building this international collaborative so that we can share knowledge to kind of be used all over globally, because everybody has, if they're not military sites, they're former industrial sites or multi-unit residential buildings that could be contaminated with lead-based paint, asbestos. So, life keeps moving along. The paper, if we can get it through the ban on talking to external people, will go into a Ukrainian journal published at Kharkiv University. So it's just people just keep surviving, keep living, keep doing what they love, despite all the devastation that's going on.
Yeah, no, thank you. One thing that I think of, and in that sense, I was really impacted. Thank you so much for this. I would please share when it comes out. As I was like looking for, and I was, getting in this field of environmental humanities and looking for people for inspirations for other scholars. This work, the work of Kate Brown, it really had an impact for me. She's a historian, writing on nuclear history a lot. I would really recommend one of her last published book from 2019 called Manual for Survival, Chernobyl Guide to the Future, is on Chernobyl, but she's just a phenomenal writer. And one of the things I think that she does really well is she positions the people who inhabit actually these contaminated areas, whether it's gardeners, people return to the Chernobyl exclusion zone, doctors who work on the areas that were contaminated. So people, just workers in the industry. So people who inhabit the contaminated areas are the best knowers of what it means actually to live the contamination, right? So she kind of destabilizes this dichotomy of international agencies who have never even been to these places, right, of assessing the impacts of radiation or nuclear contamination, and kind of spotlights in very beautiful ways the people who actually live there. And I often think the same way in Ukraine, and obviously Ukraine has a wealth of environmental knowledge, in fact, that is, you can build on globally. I feel like Ukraine, in fact, unfortunately, because of these disasters, knows so much. One of them is, the management of this nuclear catastrophe in Chernobyl, and Chernobyl, even the zone of exclusion as a project of restoration, which it serves as a model for soil scientists in Ukraine now, thinking of what do we do with this contaminated soils or in areas that would be too dangerous because they're so mined, but also people on the ground, in fact. And one thing that I think in terms of like unexploded ordnance and mines, which is so sad, and we also know from other contexts, whether like Laos, Bosnia. So in the first years of post-war, you had a lot of international effort to demine, but after like 2-3 years, this sizzles out, right? And then, like what Washington Post published an article that it's like 800 years to demine Ukraine. Probably much more. But the thing is, I think we are looking at that we will continue living with the mines because, I don't think that it's, especially now, it's hard to imagine any international agency would exist for 800 years and provide constant labor, right? To demine these places. And the sadness is that it's in a lot of these places which the efforts stop at demining, it's the locals who become expert in, like in Laos, getting the things out of the ground, repurposing them, recycling, and that of course also leads to a lot of injuries many years after. So it's really heavy when you think about that temporalities, I think, that we are looking at. And of course, Russia is not a member of the ban treaty. Neither is US, actually. A lot of countries are not, but Russia, installs a lot of mines everywhere. There was a precedent that Ukraine also used mines, but Ukraine is a member of the ban treaty, the international ban treaty. But the extent to which Russia mines territories is really.
So I have another question. What is the general status in and around Chernobyl? Because I get a sense from what I read that plants, insects, animals are doing well, so to speak. They're repopulating the area. But do you have more information about, not, in all detail, but some information about the status in and around Chernobyl?
So there are several aspects. So one thing is, of course, each particular, like the different ways in which different elements undergo the different half-lives. So like plutonium, I can't, I'm supposed to, I can tell you numbers, but some of them stop being radioactive sooner than others. So for some, radioactivity lasts for like thousands of years. For them, it's a couple of days. So people who were during the explosion in a close proximity, they were the most the most at risk. Some of them only have a life of like 30 years. So after 30 years, a lot of these radioactive elements are not present there, but a lot of them are still are. So, you know, it's not just like one, so the different temporality scales. So one thing. The other thing, I think we tend to, there's something about humans that we love narratives of environmental recovery. And another example beyond Chernobyl. So Chernobyl is one. It's like, oh, Chernobyl has all these wolves and wild boars. Look how great. And similar narrative circulated during COVID with the like dolphins returning to Venice. I don't know if it remembers, but it's like, or like, I don't know, wild goats in Scotland come into towns. Like we love this, and I think it speaks to our kind of need to say like, oh, no matter how awfully we screw up, like no matter how much we like destroy things, the goats will come back, the dolphins will flourish. So I think it's a kind of, this is a tricky narrative that I don't want to necessarily perpetuate, because it resolves us also about a responsibility in relation to these places. That's one thing. Right. The other thing, right, this is losing my thought. But the other thing is, of course, then what does it, I mean, let's imagine it this way. I mean, like, let's talk about this way. What does it mean that for the animals, they would prefer to live in the nuclear contaminated areas than with us, right? In the environments that we, I mean, it's a very depressing
That's a different perspective. Yeah.
Like that they would rather go to this contaminated land than, stay in whatever, the non-exclusion zone. Okay. So, but also like in that regard, I also recommend the work of Kate Brown, because she like also addresses it that, in fact, there is a chapter on scientists who study the absence of insects in the woods.
Okay.
But it's not everything visible to the eye. And I think we have to be skeptical of these narratives. I mean, of course, there is a kind of, there is perhaps hope that like, and any intervention into the environment, bounces off in different ways, and including in the war, in some of the areas, because they're deserted by people, animals returned, right? But I always want to put it in a larger context, right? Like that it doesn't absolve it doesn't mean that the war is good for environment, right? Right? Because sometimes it's a risk saying like, oh, look at this, like it's a kind of, I'm afraid to like slip into this false optimism. And then I always ask, so, but what actually conditions, how do we actually know about the conditions of life of these animals? What are the real impacts? How much we know? So yeah, so I'm personally
skepticism is good.
Skeptical, cautious.
Yeah,
right?
Skepticism is good. Yes, keep questioning, keep observing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mutria, we probably should end in another few minutes here.
Yeah, I think we're about ready to wrap up. So, Daria, you see that we have, especially with our artists and scientists in Chicago, we have a lot in common in terms of the kind of environmental and artistic and scientific subjects that we're interested in. So please do come up to downtown or the North Side. I'm also going to connect you. We had a professor from Michigan State University. He was on earlier, but he had to drop off.
Yeah, I got his email. He got mine, so we'll connect. Yes.
Yeah, he's an environmental engineer, and he was interested. His ears perked up when you said you're coming to Michigan, but you're going to be more in the western
part. Nature station. I'm going very briefly tomorrow to look at this nature station, but I'm happy to come and draw some plants or talk more.
Michigan State is one of, this is from the experience of having a daughter who's looking at colleges. She's interested in history, Eastern European history in particular. And so we've found that University of Michigan, as well as Michigan State, have, and this is where Tadabata is from, they have strong programs in Eastern European history and Ukrainian studies in particular. So you will have friends to make all over Michigan. Probably, I think you know about Indiana University.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Program. So, and obviously you've made your connections with the University of Illinois. So last call for questions, but thank you everyone for joining. This has been, I love the art and the story of how you came to the subject matter. And so we came from very different ends of the galaxy, but we've really come to a place where we have a lot of overlapping interests. So personally, I hope to work with you more.
Absolutely.
Any final questions from anyone?
Okay. Doesn't seem like it.
Well, let us know when the book is out.
2nd of June in the US.
Okay, that's coming up soon.
Yeah,
right.
I know.
So I'll go ahead and say thanks to our guest speaker today. Thanks to my co-host today. Thanks for all my regular Environmental Fridays attendees, and thanks for our new attendees. I see Rude, Vanette, I see who else is here? Ina. David was on earlier. So hopefully you guys can come back again. Every Friday at this time, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. If it's Friday, it's Environmental Fridays. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Desmond. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a restful
Bye.
weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, Vinette, send me stuff.
Yes, ma'am.
I will.
Okay. Very good.